Welcome to the Radical Bureaucrat, a podcast for people who want to change institutions from the inside.
I'm Sam Rosaldo, and I believe that good government matters, like, a lot.
Oh, me too. I'm Abram Garrett, and I believe that complicated problems never have simple solutions.
Oh, me too.
If you work in a bureaucracy like we do,
or if you care about bureaucracies,
then we think you'll get a lot out of our podcast.
The Radical Bureaucrat. I mean, this idea has the potential to really turn bureaucracies on their heads.
Yeah, it does.
To use one of our metaphors, it will rock the boat 360 degrees in every direction, but without knocking anyone out.
Yeah, I'm excited. So do you want to say what it is, or?
I mean, for suspense, can we add a drum roll?
You mean like add a recording of a drum roll, or like me like bang on the table?
I don't know, whatever you can come up with, Dave.
Right, yeah, sure, I can do that.
What we're talking about is LOVE, love.
What
Mind
is it? Blown.
Right. You're so surprised, right? What does love mean in a bureaucracy?
If you like what you're hearing on our podcast, leave us a review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. It really does make a world of difference.
And we're going to be using this book that we've both been reading for the last couple weeks. The book is called All About Love, New Visions, and it's by Bell Hooks, a well-known and well-loved author. We're not really going to like do a text-based like paragraph by paragraph kind of analysis. We're just going to kind of be borrowing stuff that we've been thinking about as we've read through the book and sort of using it as a resource on the way.
Yeah, that's right. And I'd like to take a second just to say why we're doing this. So the seed for this idea was planted a few months ago when I made a staff member that I supervise cry.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, I texted you right after it happened, and I felt awful. And I was really struggling with the tension between accountability, quote-unquote accountability, and empathy. I had basically lost patience with her and with the conversation we were having during a phone call. And I ended the call, and then afterwards, I just wrote her a directive in an email.
Yeah, so this is like the ladder of discipline thing where you have to like have documentation that somebody is like not following orders or whatever.
Yeah, and without saying what it was, she knew what it was. She called it out. She said, I see what you're doing here. And it really hurt her feelings. And it got me thinking about human relationships in the bureaucracy and how the bureaucracy can, in so many ways, actively discourage us from considering each other's humanity.
Yeah, like even that like ladder of discipline concept is a like check in the bureaucracy for when people get too human and like argue with each other.
Yeah.
And it's like, no. We have a chain of command.
Yep.
Make sure everybody follows the rules.
Yep.
Like that, like that's the bureaucracy's way of coping with our humanity, but it has a very kind of dehumanizing quality to it, doesn't it?
Totally. It totally does. It's like, you don't even have to think about it. Just follow this process.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So anyway, that happened. And honestly, it was through taping this podcast with you that I had another epiphany, which is that I just so much value the relationship we're building through this work.
Aww.
Hey. And, you know, we should be so lucky as to build those types of relationships in our workplace. Like and we both work for the same bureaucracy, but in different offices.
Mm-hmm.
And
which means we never see each other ever.
We never see each other. But it makes me think about, like, you're still my colleague in a sense, and we still have built this relationship in a very outside the bureaucracy way, I guess.
I think what you're trying to say is that you love me, and I love
do.
you too, Sam.
Well, thank you. I do love you.
Hopefully our listeners are not completely weirded out, but we're going to get into that today.
Well, that's part of the thing. Like we just said, this is a radical concept.
Yeah.
Like it's supposed to make people feel uncomfortable.
That discomfort is what happens anytime we touch on radical issues.
Yeah, it should. So love. Let's get into it. Why are we talking about this, and what does it mean that we're choosing to discuss it? So I actually want to start off with a quote that Hooks uses right in the beginning of the book from Diane Ackerman. And the quote is this. She says, "As a society, we are embarrassed by love. We treat it as if it were an obscenity. We reluctantly admit to it. Even saying the word makes us stumble and blush. Love is the most important thing in our lives, a passion for which we would fight for or die, and yet we're reluctant to linger over its names. Without a supple vocabulary, we can't even talk or think about it directly.
Yeah, I was at AERA, the American Educational Researcher Association, which is a humongous conference of conferences. And there was a session because it was the 50th anniversary of Pedagogy of the Oppressed, which is a book by Paulo Freire or Freire. I don't exactly know how to pronounce it.
I think you're saying it pretty well.
But there was all these people on the stage who had like worked with him, back in the 70s or whatever. And one of them was saying how Paulo reached this certain point in his career where every time he would get on the stage, he would talk about love. And that finally, like, other colleagues would come up to him, the friend of Paulo Freire, and be like, why is he talking about love? Is he okay? Is he sick? What's going on? But no, like, he had just, and I think there's a book, right, Pedagogy of Love, that came out later, which he had just realized that, like, love is the answer, and I'm not going to be afraid of it. I'm going to commit to producing an ethic of love in the way that we talk about education.
Yeah, and that's why we start with Ackerman's quote, because she's saying love is everything, and yet we won't even talk about it.
Yeah.
So today we're going to talk about it.
All right, let's do it.
Yeah. So what is love?
I feel the need to sing when you say what is love.
Go for it. Maybe we can.
No, I really shouldn't.
We
Maybe
can edit in the song.
Yeah, we can edit in the song right here.
So
what is love?
Go ahead. What you take the definition.
So in the book, she uses Scott Peck, which I thought was really interesting, and I don't know if it's exactly how I would define love, but she says that Scott Peck defines love as the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth.
Right.
So, like many definitions, this is a little bit like opaque. So, like, extend oneself, meaning like leave one's comfort zone or like put oneself out there. For what? For one's own spiritual growth. So me loving myself would be extending myself for my own spiritual growth, right? And then me loving others would be extending myself for their spiritual growth. And she goes on in the book to kind of unpack this stuff. And I thought it was pretty interesting. I don't know that this matches my kind of personal idea of what love is, but what did you think?
There's a couple parts of this that I thought she made really important. So one is not just to extend oneself, but the will. So she makes it very clear that love, this is a big part of what she's saying, is that love is an active, it's a verb, it's not a noun, it's a choice. So
you can't like unintentionally love someone.
Yeah, and it's not a feeling. So this she rejects the notion that we like fall in love, right? Like love is something that you actually have to do. And so I think that gives it a certain meaning and clarity that I accept. And I like that notion that you have to opt into loving somebody and you have to be very intentional about it. And just because you're smitten with somebody or crazy about them, that doesn't mean that you are actively loving them. Yeah,
like you might be infatuated and I thought it was she talks about this idea of cathextion or cathecting.
Yes.
And like basically like investing energy into a person or a project or a thing. And I think even that shows how that can't be love, because you can cathect, you can invest feeling and energy and attachment into a project, a thing that you're working on, and you can have that sense of loss if it doesn't go well, right? That's not what love is. That's just an investment of affection or care or feelings. Love is this other thing. It's funny, like I can't really think about love in terms of my lens without kind of going back to a spiritual foundation as well. And so I think it's interesting that Peck's definition, or the one that she chooses here, is about spiritual growth. And she clarifies that spiritual means the kind of alignment of all of the different parts of yourself. So the mind, the emotions, the body, the the soul, whatever you think the different parts of a person are, that's what she means by spiritual growth, is the growth of the whole person. For me, love is a very charged word. As somebody who for the better part of almost 20 years now has been a profoundly committed practitioner of a religion based on this teacher in the Middle East a couple thousand years ago who happened to bring up this word love a lot. Like, I can't really hear somebody give me advice about what love is without going back to that sort of foundation. And there's another thing that it's awkward to talk about at work that is impossible to acknowledge, right?
Yep.
Like, it's impossible for me to like say the word Jesus without people having some people having the hairs on the back of their neck stand up because they're worried they're going to get yelled at or something, right?
We're in New York City. So.
New York City. There's lots of churches in New York City.
Sure.
Lots of churches.
We're taping this in Harlem. There's like more churches per capita here than anywhere else.
Right. I think of love in similar terms as an idea of commitment, an idea of extending oneself, an idea of putting another before yourself, I think is a key piece of love. For me, it really is that denial of the self on behalf of the one loved that is sort of the essence of love. I don't know, maybe we'll edit this out, maybe we won't, but Jesus says that the one who lays down his life for his friends, that's what love is, right? So it's so to me it is that extending of oneself for others. And then the funny thing is there isn't actually a lot of talk to my mind in the Bible about loving oneself. It tells you to love others as you love yourself. It sort of assumes that you love yourself. And that the real challenge is to love other people. But I think in modern life and in bureaucracies, that's actually the opposite. It's actually really hard to love yourself and not kind of lose yourself in the work and lose yourself and your relationships and your health and your wholeness to the work and the choices that you have to make on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I think that's right. And we are going to talk a little bit more about what love looks like in bureaucracy, but I just want to round out this part about the definition. Another thing that she says is she says a couple things about what love is not. So there can be no love if there is not honesty, right? This honesty is in no way a part of love, and abuse is in no way part of love.
Yeah.
And that notion of abuse, we won't get into too much because she talks about like corporal punishment being antithetical,
child rearing, and the need basically that any corporal punishment of a child amounts to abuse, right? Is sort of what she argues. Yeah,
but the thing is for me, and it goes back to this conversation, the ladder of discipline is like at almost what constitutes abuse. I mean, that's some of the opaqueness, right? Like for her, she talks about corporal punishment, but there's so many things in between that could be types of punishments that could be interpreted as abuse.
Yeah. I mean, I was definitely whooped as a kid. But I don't think that the corporal meaning of the body, right? Abuse was the stuff that left the strongest marks. The stuff that left the strongest marks in my childhood was all verbal. And so, what is abuse exactly, right? And is there discipline, including discipline that is of the body, that is not abusive? And that's a complicated thing. And it's doubly complicated by another thing that she tries to tackle, which is the idea that like parents really are the sole decision makers over how their child will be disciplined. And she kind of tries to take that on and say that, well, doesn't it take a village to raise a child? Like, shouldn't there be other adults involved at the very least so that children have somebody to appeal to? Which I thought was a pretty attractive model or argument. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to go and tell somebody what the right way to rear their children is. That feels more judgmental than loving to my mind.
Yeah. And she makes a distinction between abuse and discipline and talks about, the example of like, well, insisting that kids clean up after themselves is instilling discipline.
That was one of the things I got beat over the most often.
I know, right? How do you get a kid to clean up after themselves without engaging in some form of punishment or abuse?
Yeah, I mean, I wonder, people are probably going to ask at some point whether or not we have children, whether or not we beat them. So I can't wait for that conversation to happen.
Yeah. Actually, I think this is going to be a great episode to hear back from listeners on.
Absolutely.
So you can hit us up on our social media or email address.
Before we move on, actually, I had one more thing about what love is not. And that is, okay, so there's no love if there's dishonesty, and there's no love if there's abuse. And yes, I agree.
Right.
However, that feels like a definition of love that itself is a little bit dehumanizing, because people are deeply imperfect and make mistakes, largely based on traumas that they've faced in their past. Right. And so somewhere in love, there has to be almost like, if you think about it like computer programming, like an error checking algorithm. Like, okay, my wife and I love each other very much, but we're not perfect. And we have moments where we say a thing that is hurtful, that is verbally abusive. We have moments of dishonesty where I didn't tell you about that. Right. I withheld that. And I regret withholding it, because that's almost always a bad idea when you're married.
Yeah. Oh God.
Oh boy.
Tell me about it.
Oh jeez. But when it happens, there's got to be some kind of grace, some kind of forgiveness that is a part of love.
Right.
And so I, that's one thing that I've been kind of like knocking around in my head, is the idea that love has to include some error checking, some garbage collection, as we would say again in computer programming. Like, there's a lot of garbage that comes out in real human relationships, and you've got to be able to collect that and process it and still invest in a relationship. So it was sort of, it's
perfect.
nice for it to be absolute, but there's no such thing as perfect love, at least
absolutely.
Not in this life.
And I would imagine, because I think that is a point that she doesn't really make in the book, but I think is very apparent. And I would imagine that she would say, that's true, and then you need to go back to loving. You're gonna make mistakes, and you need to like you said, error check, and then go back, correct the course, and go back to that verb of investing in the will to extend it for yourself and others' spiritual growth.
All right, so now we're really far, it feels like, from the bureaucracy.
We are, but we really need to lay that groundwork to define love, to talk about why it's important, and why we're uncomfortable with it. And so she has this quote where she says, "When I first declared my desire to work in a loving environment, friends acted as though I had truly lost my mind. To them, love and work did not go together. But I was convinced that I would work better in a work environment shaped by an ethic of love." I wanted to throw that out there right off the bat to say, Bell Hooks has thought about what does it mean to love in a bureaucracy?
Love in the workplace, and not in the way you're thinking about.
Exactly, right.
So what do you think about her assertion here? Is it crazy to want to have a workplace or work environment where there is love? Or is...
She's not crazy.
She's not crazy in your
No,
mind.
she's not. But I think the reason why we're talking about this is because there are so many obstacles in our way.
Okay.
And so we're having the conversation to say, and where I hope we get to is, well then, how do we overcome those obstacles? And what does this look like? What does it look like to actively love in the bureaucracy?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we're thwarted all the time. And so ultimately, there are contexts in which really, really loving the way that we want to, maybe it is impossible, but I think there's lots of places where we can love, we can infuse it in there.
Yeah, and it's even interesting to think about the ways in which care can be exercised in an organization, in a company, but not love, right? Where people can be given, dry cleaning and lunch for free, but they're also worked to the bone and expected not to have a personal social life. And the reason you can eat all you can eat at for all meals of the day is because they want you to be at your desk 24 hours a day.
Right.
And there's a difference between care and love. And I it's interesting to think about how we can be duped into that kind of junk food version of care, where we get all these amenities, but we don't really get our whole person taken care of.
Yeah. And I wanted to bring it back at this point to the specific word growth, spiritual growth. So what does... I've been thinking about this lately. Like, I want a supervisor who is deeply invested in my spiritual growth. Although, now that I say that, I it's just growth. I want a supervisor who's invested in my growth, spiritual or not. Because I want to keep growing. I want to get better at what I do. I want to be nurtured in that way. And I want to be invested in, and I don't want it to just be about accomplishing what's on my job description. And so I guess my question is, like, because who doesn't want to grow?
Yeah, I was just having a conversation with my younger brother. Shout out to Josh. What's up, man? Just having a conversation with my younger brother about work. And he was saying to Lisa that, like, it doesn't really matter what kind of job I have. All jobs suck. And Lisa was kind of like, that's not a really healthy way to... Lisa's my wife, by the way. That's not a really healthy way to look at it. Like, it's kind of like defeating yourself before you ever start. I think he made a really good point that, like, work needs to occupy a minimal amount of my brain bandwidth so that I can then have something left over to invest in things that I actually love, that will actually contribute to my growth as a human or whatever. And I think there are probably a lot of people who feel that way, who feel that work, they want to get paid and make a living doing something that they can keep confined to a work week.
Yep.
So that then they have energy and time and money, resources, to be able to do the things that they want to do, right?
Yeah. I'm feeling my class privilege a little bit too, right?
So talk about that. What do you mean by that? Why is that a class privilege thing?
Well, I think that I have the privilege to look for work that will fulfill me. And I'm not in a position where I'm scraping by just trying to find the next paycheck, like living, because I Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like I have a place to live, I have food, I have clothing, so I can look for like that next level. Whereas if I just need to take care of those basic needs, then this whole conversation is...
It's a really different conversation.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. I mean, I think that's right. So there's this great article I read a couple years ago. I'll try to find it and put it in the show notes, but about the idea of do what you love and you never have to work a day in your life.
Right.
And how much of a lie that is. How, like, people use that to underpay teachers and to underpay nurses, basically to underpay women, right? Anything that's women's work gets underpaid. Because don't you gather some value from being a teacher? And so therefore you shouldn't have to be paid more to do it, right? And that is this, like, crock, it's this lie, right?
Yeah.
Like, I do think there is a kind of class privilege or maybe education privilege that's sort of in there. But I think that what the world that Bell Hooks is probably imagining, and certainly the world that I imagine, is a world where we're not sort of forced to compete with each other for the lowest value labor in order just to put bread on the table, right? Like, and the truth is that we live in a society that's structured so that some people get to demand growth from their work and other people have to accept not growth from their work and have to find their growth somewhere else. So I think we're sort of imagining a philosophical republic where, like, everybody wants growth, right? And I think that probably lots of people want growth. They just don't see it as something that they'll ever get at work. I think that's why people have hobbies. They invest energy into things. They invest energy into playing soccer or into building model planes or whatever it is that they invest time and energy into, raising children,
right? Because
that's where their hope and investment or extension of themselves is placed, not in their work.
Yeah.
I mean, I think this question of work and organizations and the ways in which they humanize or dehumanize us is a profound question that I think humanity has been wrestling with at least as far back as Marx right? Because Marx talks about the dehumanization of labor. If not much further back, I want to say that there are at least one or two things in Ecclesiastes in the Bible where he talks about work and how meaningless it feels. So this is kind of an age-old question, and so how do we bring love into the bureaucracy? I think that's really the question, isn't it?
Yeah, and she, Hooks has multiple suggestions or steps and requirements that she says we've got to follow. And one of the things that she talks about is processing our wounds. And wow, like this is almost, when I start to think about this, how do you do this in the workplace? I think it's possible, but I also think we're generally pretty far from doing something like this. So I'm going to read another quote where she talks about this notion of lovelessness as a wound and acknowledging it. She says, we need to gather our collective courage and face that our society's lovelessness is a wound. We allow ourselves to acknowledge the pain of this wound when it pierces our flesh, and we feel in the depths of our soul a profound anguish of spirit. We come face to face with the possibility of conversion, of having a change of heart. In this way, recognition of the wound is a blessing because we are able to tend it, to care for the soul in ways that make us ready to receive the love that is promised. So when I think about this quote, I'm thinking about having a really honest conversation, a very vulnerable conversation about what does it mean that we've been, if we're going to convert our workplace into a loving environment, to convert our bureaucratic workplace at that, we have to acknowledge the ways in which we've been hurt by not having love here, by feeling like I've been abused here, or people have not been invested in my growth, or we've been dishonest with each other, or I've been dishonest with myself.
Yeah, here in this office.
In this office. And I could see that happening. I can envision it, but I also think, wow, I mean, that would take a lot of trust building to get to that point.
It seems very far away from the way that we do things now.
What would be the steps to get there?
Your instincts are right. It takes a long time.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of conversations. It takes a lot of trust building and honesty and processing when feelings are hurt. And books have been written, trainings are available. Like it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to get to that point where people can really be truly honest in the workplace. Yeah.
And I think there's another part of it too, which is probably comes back to norms. And that's about opening up the space for people to show their humanity, to bring in their personal lives, their personal interests. And it doesn't always have to be, and we're going to come back to this, but it doesn't always have to be about outcomes and outputs. And so I thought of two recent examples. One is my cousins. I'm going to log roll for my cousins for a second, but they have a film coming out called Nossa Chape about the Brazilian soccer team that 2 years ago, 71 people from the team and associated with the team died in a plane crash. And it's a documentary, and the team that got wiped out, there's these beautiful scenes of them playing pagode together, which is this Brazilian music where it's kind of everybody's riffing together, and
it's like Brazilian jazz.
I suppose we should play some. It's just everybody's on an instrument or singing, and it's beautiful. And you see the soccer team spending time together in this way, and the love is palpable,
right?
And the humanity is palpable, and we know instinctively, and we know from research that engaging in those types of activities helps the team when it comes time to work. It builds trust, right? And as much as we've learned these lessons that's good, we still also have this instinct, especially in the bureaucracy, that's not time on task.
Right.
That we're not somehow getting towards our goals.
And if we are going to do it at all, it needs to be very functional.
Right.
We need to get in, spend our hour on team building, and get out.
Right. It can't be spontaneous like that. And I had another conversation with a colleague this week that also made me think about it, where for 45 minutes, we sat down and he told me a very personal story about this amazing breakthrough that he had and this spiritual breakthrough that he had. And I'm sitting there and I have the little voice in the back of my head thinking, like, should I be doing this? But because I've got, I'm supposed to be on task and moving the goals. But I'm also, at that moment, I felt a little bit like, okay, I'm doing my radical bureaucrat thing, because I'm going to sit here and I'm going to listen. And I also know that this is going to move the work ultimately.
Right. Yeah.
Like, and that little thing that we're doing together one-on-one is a seed for something that I hope could grow a little bit.
Yeah.
And I give him credit because he came to me and was like, I want to tell you this story. And I think that he's the type of person that does that. And I'm not going to name him, but he does that with his colleagues when he sees the opening, because he knows it's a good thing. And he knows that bond that we're creating somehow is just good for the universe.
Yeah, I look at the people in my life that are sort of leaders or mentors that I think I sort of am modeling myself after. And they're often the ones that would take the time to listen to a story, that would take the time to tell a story, to explain themselves, that would take the time to just kind of be together, to whether it was sort of watching a sporting event or, watching the Super Bowl together or something, or whatever it is. I think about both in my sort of private life and the sort of church life that I'm involved in, as well as professionally in the professional realm. The people who I've respected the most and been willing to put the most of myself forward for are people who modeled kind of what you're talking about, who were willing to kind of set aside the demands of today to do the work of basically love, of listening, of offering healing or space for healing, like what you're describing. So I think that there's very much a kind of leadership lesson there, that part of what a leader does, an effective leader does, is create those spaces, which feels perhaps antithetical to outcomes or outputs or efficiency, but is incredibly important for effectiveness. So yeah, creating that space for healing in many ways has a lot to do, and I think I said it a minute ago, with honesty. And can I really be honest? Can I really be myself, right, in front of you without fearing, reprisal or something like that? And it's interesting because the book talks about honesty, and it's interesting to think about, is the way that we're doing the work really honest and really making space for people to be really honest? Or are we being asked to gloss over what we feel is the truth? Are we asking others to do the same?
Yeah, I really think we are. And I think that it's very hard to resist. And I want to get into that, but I want to give a few quotes from Hooks that really, I think, bring home what we mean by honesty and why it matters so much. So the first one, I love this because I was in a meeting last month, and we did a one-on-one partner share, and I think one of the questions that we had to ask each other was when are you dishonest? And this guy said to me, I don't think I'm ever dishonest. I think I always represent myself. And then he kind of admitted, well, sometimes, if I don't want to say something, I'll just hold it in.
Right.
And I was like, oh, well, that might not be so honest of you.
Right.
And Brooke says exactly that. She says, she's talking about men specifically, but she was talking about a relationship, but she says his favorite way of lying was withholding.
Right.
In other words, withholding is lying.
Right. We think of it primarily as what I would call a sin of commission. You commit the sin of lying. But there's also omission, right? There is omission as a type of error or sin that people commit. And yeah, withholding is a kind of dishonesty by omission.
Yeah. And I think that's something we do a lot in the workplace, in the
Speak
bureaucracy.
for yourself, Sam.
Well, and I want to get into some specifics around this, but I want to give a few more quotes. So about the cost, she says, when you lie, you present a false self, and that, again, she's talking about men. We're going to talk about that, but she says the terrible price they pay to maintain power over us is the loss of their capacity to give and receive love. So when you withhold, when you lie, you do it in order to keep your power.
Yep.
And
Sounds
you
very familiar.
lose the most important thing, the ability to give and receive love.
Yeah. And this is kind of a fundamental argument of the book. And I think it comes out very early. But I had sort of a few underlines that I, in the back of my mind, am trying to get to. And one of them is this one, that an awakening to love can happen only as we let go of our obsession with power and domination. Right? That there is a kind of a mutually exclusive binary of power and domination, power over others, and love and humanization. And I might even say like justice or freedom, right? Like power over others comes at the price of all those other things, because you can't have power over others if you're just one of them. You can only have influence and you can only have power together. But we live in a world that is structured around power over others, that is structured around hierarchy, right? And this is how it's maintained.
Yeah, and in another place, she calls that a major moral dilemma.
Right.
You know, you have a choice to make, and so much of what we're trying to accomplish in these bureaucracies, God, how many times have we said bureaucracy in this podcast? But is to achieve more power. I want to ask you, Abram, do you struggle with this? Like, is there a way that you think about how you feel like either you've worked on it and you've become more honest, kind of a positive example, or a way in which you feel that your honesty that you've been withholding at times?
Are you asking if I'm lying to you right now?
I'm talking about at work.
I don't know. It's tough. I mean, I've talked with Lisa about this quite a bit, about the issue of honesty. And I feel that I have a very sort of what I would call like a sensitive conscience for honesty. I feel extremely betrayed when I feel like I've been lied to. I feel like I try to hold myself to a pretty high standard of honesty. And yet at the same time, I am big into strategy, which many times strategy is about deception. It's about portraying that you have more expertise or force than you really do, right? It's about tricking the enemy into seeing something that's not there, right? That's what strategy ultimately is. And so how does that work? How do I have the kind of moral flexibility? And, Lisa calls me on this every now and again, that like, are you being honest right now? And yet feel like, no, I'm a very honesty is very important to me as a person. It's a very important value. Right. And it's something that I've kind of wrestled with or struggled with. I don't know that I've gotten better or worse at it. I'm certainly good at identifying it, at sort of seeing that like, okay, if I'm going to be really honest in this situation, I'm going to have to, think about what the implications are of that honesty and be ready to accept whatever those implications are. Otherwise, I'm just being reckless, right? And like, I don't know, sometimes I may be honest about what I think, but that doesn't mean that I'm right about what I think, right? So like, I don't know, I think it's complicated. But yeah, it's definitely something that I've wrestled with. I try really hard to be honest and transparent. I think transparency, honesty is an important value to me, but it's difficult. Sometimes people don't want to hear all the honesty that you have to give, right? Sometimes.
Well, that's one thing that I was starting to think about is feedback. And that's a place, and knowing where people stand, knowing where you stand with others, and letting other people know where they stand with you.
Yeah.
And of course, one thing they say about feedback is that it's most effective when people ask for it, but people don't always ask for feedback. But I do think that one thing that can be helpful is building structures in for providing feedback, to say we're gonna talk we're gonna have this quarterly review or semi-annual or annual, whatever it is, and we're gonna give each other feedback and say what we think each other are doing well and where we think that each other can improve. And when you don't have that, I think some withholding can happen.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think also the element that you were talking about a second ago is less complicated for me. So you were talking about how we're sort of socialized to avoid conflict, basically. I wasn't really socialized that way. I was socialized to engage in conflict. That was kind of how I was brought up.
Maybe in your household, but in other places you've probably been socialized.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I feel the social pressure to don't rock the boat. Sit down. You're rocking the boat, right? There's actually another quote in here that I thought was really good in this respect. She says on page 58 of the book, she says, since many of us were shamed in childhood, either in our families of origin or in school settings, a learned pattern of going along with the program and not making a fuss is the course of action we most frequently choose as a way to avoid conflict. So I actually got in trouble in school, a lot, daily, for not going along with the program. I wish I would have saved all of the referral slips so that I could have a wallpaper. I think it was that many. I could paper the wall in my house with the number of referrals to the principal's office that included the word disruptive on them. And I think that's very much, for the last few years, something that I've learned to lean into, because it's something that people really need. Because when I'm feeling a kind of way about this conversation and we're not being honest with ourselves, so are half of the people at the table. But we're all socialized into this acceptance and going along with. And I can't tell you how many people have come up to me after a meeting and have said, I'm so glad that you said that, because I felt the exact same way. And I feel like we need to talk about that in this project. And I think to myself, I feel a little bit well, why didn't you say something? But I think the truth of it is that it's very difficult. It's very difficult to paint a target on your forehead by raising your hand and saying, isn't this nonsense? Why are we doing this?
Yeah, I think that actually, and we've talked about this, that our new chancellor, Richard Carranza, has been a great model. And sometimes, and that takes stepping outside the box.
Yeah.
Right? And having a fresh perspective.
And stepping outside that box means that somebody is going to check you, right?
Yeah. Yeah. But it also takes a certain type of intelligence
to
do that. And, he's done it the other day. He's like, I don't even know why we have screen schools anyway. And it was
people were like,
yeah, right? He's like, and then afterwards,
competition.
And then afterwards he said, I didn't think it was that controversial. They're public schools. Why are we barring certain students from admission? I want to bring it back to the withholding piece. And I want to talk about some of the ways in which Hooks points out that these are very gendered expectations. This quote where she's talking about men and withholding and honesty actually struck me as quote unquote good bureaucrat behavior. So I'm just gonna read the quote. She says, male inability and or refusal to honestly express feelings is often talked about as a positive masculine virtue women should learn to accept, rather than a learned habit of behavior that creates emotional isolation and alienation. So again, she's talking about this idea that we're taught that it's a good thing when men don't express their feelings, and that women should be more like that. And, when a woman cries, it's oh, they're being unprofessional. They're bringing emotion into the workplace, and let alone when a man would cry, right? And so let's not have workplaces where people show their emotions. Keep it inside and keep it moving. We don't have to process all our feelings here. This is what we're supposed to do in a bureaucracy. So
that kind of brings us back to your story earlier, doesn't it? Like the way that the system is set up and the procedures that you're supposed to go through as a manager when you feel like somebody is not performing up to their expectations, those are like designed to like remove all sentimentality and emotion from the situation, right?
Yeah. I remember, I'm thinking of another supervisor I once had when I was teaching. I was teaching in this school, and I think it was my second or third year there, and I'd been working for a very, very tough principal, very smart woman, but tough as nails. And at the beginning of the year, she spoke and probably started to tear up, talking about how hard the year was going to be because she was feeling very, very upset because one of the teachers who she really leaned on as a pillar of support and as a confidant had left the school, and that was just a big loss for her. And I was so grateful. I was so glad she did that. And I told her publicly and I told her privately, like, that was good. Like, I want to see you do more of that. Like that, I feel so much more connected. And yet, again, like, that's not I don't feel like our norms in any way support that type of behavior. I thought that was a courageous move, and I never saw her do something like that again, actually, despite my encouragement. So
I wonder if other people came up to her and said, like, that's not a good look. Like,
that made me uncomfortable. I doubt it. In that setting, I don't think they would. Perhaps in another setting.
That moment, right? Mm-hmm. Crying in front of an audience when you're the leader, especially if you're a woman, that's a very risky moment.
Yeah.
Right? You're risking everybody, like, not respecting you or something like that.
You know, the one emotion you're not supposed to show is upset and crying. Mm-hmm. But there are other ways in which you can emote that are more acceptable. And so as I'm thinking about our listeners who might be, we're not all about to go get up in front of a group and cry, but there are ways that whenever we share of ourselves.
Right.
And I do think that behavior is also actively discouraged, or at least not in any way endorsed. But every time I share something personal about myself, people receive it so well. Mm-hmm. Like, here's a little secret. Anyone out there who has babies, talk about your babies when you're in public.
That's the key.
Yeah, that's the key. Oh man, I mean, when I came to District 79, I spoke at a large PD, professional development, about 3 months after I came on board, and my kid had just been born, my first child, and I was kind of rehearsing at home for Naima, and she said to me, say something about the baby. And so we worked it into my comments.
It's a smart woman, Naima.
Yeah. And you know what happened when I said something about my baby? Oh.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And you know what else has happened? For the last 10 years, people who are at that PD, they don't remember it, but they ask me how my kids are.
Yep.
It always, how are you? How's the babies? Like, they're 10. Yeah, he's actually almost 10 years old, but he
doesn't like being called baby. He's reached that age.
But what a connection, Yeah. And it's a great, like, so many of these things are not just about love and humanity and altruism. They're about doing the work better.
Right. Well, it's both things, right? Love, humanity, altruism are about doing the work better. Right? Doing the work as a non-human is not better.
Yeah.
Although, I don't know, maybe we'll invent robots that can do a better job than me at the kind of work I do. It seems very suspect. It seems to me
Selling yourself short
like
again,
the
Abram.
thing. Yeah, I'm just ready to welcome my extended vacation at the hands of robot overlords. I think that the things that are quintessentially human are the things that some kind of an algorithm, policy, bureaucracy will almost never be able to recreate at scale. And so, like, why not, if what we want is a system that values the humanity in everyone, why not start acting more human more of the time, right? Like, I don't know. Am I crazy? Would it be bedlam? Everybody would just be crying in the conference room all day long? Like, I don't know. I do think, like, whenever I really lean in and imagine what the world is like when we act more human and less robotic, so then we have some people who quit and become artists. That sounds great to me.
Yeah.
It sounds great to me that we have more artists. Like, awesome.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. Like, it just seems so short-sighted to want it to be more efficient and to push out those things that make us what we are, human.
Yeah. No, we have some people who quit and become artists. Fine. We have other people, though, who are like, stay because of how affirmed they are in this space, and who do the work better, who bring that passion to the work, who bring their whole selves to it. And it's like, oh, but we spent 2 hours this week talking about our feelings. Yeah, but we spent 38 other hours, or 48, or however many people wanted to, doing the work with that extra oomph and that extra creativity and just getting it done.
Yeah, I think a big part of what you're saying is a leadership commitment. You have to have a boss that's going to say what you just said, right? Yeah. That, like, yes, I know some of you are going to feel like XYZ, but the other 38 hours, this is what it's going to look like. And I think it's worth it. This is what I'm committed to. There's a leadership element there. Leaders, we need leaders who are going to commit to rehumanizing their offices, their teams.
There's that. And there's the intermediate steps, right? Because every one of us can be more human in our interactions, just like in the story I told with the colleague who came to me and said, I want to tell you about this. And then I was able to sit and listen. We can do that in our one-on-ones. We can do that in our indirect leadership. We can do it. There's lots of opportunities to be more human. Ideally, it becomes a norm that exists throughout the workplace. But in between, we all know those colleagues who bring their humanity into the workplace.
So we can all be leaders. We don't have to wait around for a leader to
ding, ding, ding.
point the way.
So we've talked a lot about what love is not. We've talked a lot about what it should be in an ideal world, and even a few intermediate steps, but we haven't really talked about how we would get there writ large. And it's not easy. There's no magic bullet.
There's not?
Sorry, everybody, if that's what you're waiting for. But Hooks she has a chapter called The Love Ethic, in which she does talk about some of the necessary steps. And I don't even want to say steps, because they're not steps that you can just check off on a list. But they're kind of requisite pieces of a workplace and a society that loves.
Yeah, I mean, it took us a second to recognize it as like a 3-point plan.
Right.
And I don't know that she would say that that's what it is, but they do strike me as like 3 key work streams, 3 key buckets that she kind of lays out. And so she says that it's that we do this by choosing to work with individuals we admire and respect. Mm-hmm. That's 1. By committing to give our all to relationships. That's 2. And by embracing a global vision wherein we see our lives and our fate as intimately connected to those of everyone else on the planet. That's 3. Mm-hmm. So sort of 3-point plan, or 3-point platform, 3 planks in the platform. Number 1, choose to work with individuals who you admire and respect. Mm-hmm. Now, I wonder for a little bit if that's like a class privilege thing or not. Like, not everybody gets to choose their work. Although you might argue that everybody makes that choice, whether they make it feeling like they have no choice or not. What do you think about that as like a concrete thing to look at? How do you operationalize love in the bureaucracy through the lens of choosing who you work with?
I think it's something I think about my friend Ashindi.
Okay.
And
tell me.
Ashindi's someone who I just have so much love and respect for. And when she looks for jobs, she looks for people that she wants to work with. And and she always talks about it in those terms, like, that's someone I really want to work with.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's something that you can naturally do. It's just a matter of priorities.
It sort of leads into the second point, right? The second point is about giving our all to relationships.
Yep.
And this one for me really stood out because it was kind of the question that I asked a second ago. What do we give our all to in our work? Is it relationships or is it something else? What do you think the bureaucracy asks us to give our all to?
Yeah, metrics.
Metrics. Yeah, we define metrics. If you're smart, you define a metric that you think you can achieve.
Right,
So we give our all to success.
Right.
We give our all to winning.
Right.
And we give our all to competing. We give our all to like outcomes or outputs, whatever is measured. If you want people to care about something, you got to measure it, right? All right. And finally, embracing a global vision. And this part very much reminded me of a favorite quote from Martin Luther King, that we're all in an inescapable network of mutuality, which she, I think, quotes later in the book. Embracing a global vision that says that we're all connected, that we're connected to every other person on the planet. What do we do instead of that in bureaucracies? What kind of vision do we adopt that is not a global vision where we're all connected?
One thing that I think that we do is we set goals.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been some literature about the drawbacks, the way in which goal setting can make us myopic.
Mm-hmm.
We get so focused on the goal, as we talked about, it's the metrics, it's the winning, and then the point of the work becomes the goal.
Right.
And we're not thinking about unintended consequences.
Mm-hmm.
We're not thinking about how we could actually get closer to our broader vision by ditching the goal that we had and coming up with something different. So I think there's an element of that kind of attachment to goals.
Yeah. I think another piece of the puzzle here with this one is really checking our competitive impulses.
Mm-hmm.
I think workplaces can be very competitive places. And, some of that is rightfully so. You've got to advocate for yourself because the system isn't set up to advocate for you. But you've got to also think about championing other people, right? You've got to think about success in a less zero-sum way.
Yeah.
And think about, how do we all succeed? How do I succeed in ways that create spotlights for other people, right? How do I bring into the room the people who are affected by this decision? Either explicitly, like actually bring them into the meeting, or bring their voice in, access their voice, access their ideas, and bring them into these spaces where decisions are being made for their benefit, but without them. And in some ways, what that implies is a much more humble view of the work of public policy, leadership, governing, a view that it is not about power over, but it is about power with and power for the people. And how do you bring that into the conversation in the conference room where you're making decisions together? Because we should be on the hook, not just for whether we achieved our metrics or whatever. We should be on the hook for the impact of the decisions that we make. And that means looking way out to the very distal connections and how our work impacts on them.
The whole theory of collective impact, I think, is intended to achieve what you're talking about, and perhaps a little bit about what this point, or maybe a lot, that Hooks is making about having a global vision. And when you ask what do we do that's not this, it's when we create silos between teams, agencies, organizations, and we get territorial.
Yep. We create turf.
Yeah.
We create boundaries to fight over.
Yeah.
Yep. We decide to do things because they send a message that this is our turf.
Yeah.
And
the other thing I love about this point that just goes beyond the bureaucracy is it's a very much an anti-racist point. You know, it's,
how so?
Well, recently there's been video of a meeting on the Upper West Side where parents got angry about an integration plan, school integration plan, right? But if our top priority is not just our own fate, but the fate of everyone on the planet, we don't have these types of angry meetings where we're upset about the little bit of privilege that our child is going to lose. Our excitement over doing something that is just for everyone in this city is greater than our anger at losing something. And in fact, we see that as essential to our own happiness and essential to our own values. Like, we're really living our values at that point.
Yeah. At some point we have to see that our life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness is not something that can be achieved individualistically. It's only something that can be achieved together with our neighbors. And I think there's a lot of effort over the last few centuries to undermine that point, to say, no, it's a dog-eat-dog world and you're going to compete and win. And don't worry about what happens to everybody else. Worry about your own effort. Worry about rising by your own merits. Worry about your own rags to riches story. A lot of effort has gone into selling us on this lie that we get ahead based on nothing other than our own effort. When in reality, the research shows that it's pretty much luck. It's pretty much random chance where we're born, who our parents are, and what their educational attainment is. It really has nothing to do with our effort. And yet we've been sold this bill of goods that it's our effort that does it. And in order to get to what you're describing, we have to get past that individualistic view of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness and into a collective view where my happiness, my pursuit of happiness, my liberty, my life is tied up with my neighbor's happiness and my neighbor's liberty and my neighbor's life. I think it might be a good opportunity to head toward closing.
Yes.
And I think that I wanted to just, there's this one passage that just kind of knocked me out. And I wanted to come to it. So here I am doing it. So Bell Hooks writes, this is page 89 in the book. She says, talking to a university audience recently, I expressed my faith in the power of white people to speak out against racism, challenging and changing prejudice, emphatically stating that I definitely believe we can all change our minds and our actions. I stressed that this faith was not rooted in a utopian longing, but rather that I believed this because of our nation's history, of the many individuals who have offered their lives in the service of justice and freedom. When challenged by folks who claimed that these individuals were exceptions, I agreed. But I then talked about the necessity of changing our thinking so that we see ourselves as being like the one who does change, rather than among who refuse to change. What made these individuals exceptional was not that they were any smarter or kinder than their neighbors, but that they were willing to live the truth of their values. Wow. This, I feel like, is what I've been trying to say for some time. Look, people jump on Twitter after Charlottesville. And, Charlottesville, a woman is murdered by vehicle, right? And because of a rally. An explicitly white supremacist taking our country back rally. people on Twitter burst forth with, "This is not America. This is not us." Mm-hmm. And my immediate reaction to that is, this is absolutely America.
Right.
This is the America that we have been trying to tell you about for centuries.
Right.
And you have not been listening. And it takes somebody dying like this for people to sort of wake up. The thing about that, though, is that it's not exactly true that America is a complicated idea. America is both this place of horrific violence, of horrific injustice, but it is also the place where Emma Lazarus could write, "Bring me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be free." Mm-hmm. Yes, America is a place where we can put to death 100 million Native Americans, where we could lynch tens of thousands of former slaves. It is also a place where people can stand at a pulpit and, Abraham Lincoln, who's not, in my mind, a great person, but Abraham Lincoln can stand at a pulpit and say, if we have to give back in blood every drop of blood taken by the lash, and if we have to pay back in war every dollar that we've earned from unrequited labor, then so be it. Mm-hmm. America is both of those things. I feel like this is such a difficult thing because I don't really have another place. This is it. This is where I'm from. This is who I am. I'm an American, whether I want to be or not. And it's so hard for me to process both of those realities. And I feel like what the author has done here in this little passage is she's really untangled that knot for me and said, like, yes, America has lots of problems, but I believe in the power of America to do better, because America also has lots of examples of people who have fought and died to do better. And we just have to see ourselves as those exceptions and not as among the among who does nothing, who goes along with. That was a lot.
That was dope.
Hey everyone, this is Abram, and we just wanted to quickly interrupt the episode with a real-time update about how the podcast process is going.
Yeah, and so this is Sam, and Abram, check it out. I met with a young colleague from another city agency, and she told me, I've been listening to your podcast, and I realized I'm a radical in denial.
A radical in denial. That sounds like a good episode title. Okay, so what do you think she meant?
Yeah. Well, she works in the criminal legal system, and she said that she'd been trying to do everything that the system asks of her, but she wasn't being honest with herself or with others about her real aspirations for affecting change. And then this is the key. She also realized that by denying herself her radicalness, she was in essence propping up the existing system rather than pushing for real change.
Yeah, I could see that. And so then did she feel some kind of way about that realization?
Oh, she was energized. I mean, I'm telling you, she walked into my office and just started talking as soon as she sat down. It was a lot like Patrick's reaction, which we described in episode 1 of this season. Okay. She had so many ideas she couldn't stop.
Wow, that's so cool. Yeah, that's like exactly why we're doing this whole crazy project, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And that's why we're planning for season 2. And everybody out there, that's why we need your help.
Okay.
Putting on a podcast is a lot of work. And to make this sustainable, we're going to need to pay some folks to do some of that work with us.
Oh, we just hit them with the ask. Okay, so check it out. There's editing the podcast, and then we have like a whole website and a newsletter. We've got to write show notes, and then we've got to re-edit the podcast when we realize that something is different.
And there's a little bit more editing to do right before we post each episode.
But we have so many dreams for the podcast, and more than that, we have so many dreams for building and expanding the Radical Bureaucrat community.
Hashtag Team RB.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about. So here's what we've done. We set up a PayPal button on our website at radicalbureaucrat.com to launch our first ever fundraising effort.
This will enable us to put out a second season to reach more people with even better and more content. Again, please go to radicalbureaucrat.com and hit the PayPal button.
We'd also really like to hear from you whether or not you can donate on PayPal. So what do you think we should do for future episodes? How has the podcast been resonating with you? And what else can we do to spread the word about this community and this podcast? We'd love to get these suggestions by email at info@radicalbureaucrat.com or as comments on the blog or on Twitter.
We appreciate you.
Yes, so much. Okay, so now let's get back to the show.
Well, I guess we should probably end as we end every time. And let us know if you think this is corny or is this something we should keep, because we're reaching the end of a season and we're trying to figure out what, if anything, we take into a second season, if such a thing exists. Mm-hmm. But, Sam, would you like to help us to end like a good radical and tell us one thing that you've learned today?
What's sitting with me right now is just thinking about relationships and how can I be purposeful and intentional about expressing love in my work relationships.
In an entirely appropriate way.
Of course. As soon as I said that, I think everybody who was listening was like, watch it, Sam. But here we go, kind of like
make it discomfort. All of this work, and
let's
we're
make
right
a joke
back where we started.
Yeah.
Well,
see, I was going to let it stay there, but you just had to make light.
Sorry. Other people were thinking it. That's what I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for me, I actually, it's funny. I spent the majority of 2017 really focused on the idea of hope. Where does hope come from? How do we get hope? How do we generate hope in times that feel a little bit hopeless? Mm-hmm. That gives you a picture of what my 2017 felt like, at least early 2017.
I don't think it was just you.
Yeah, it might have been a lot of people. This year, actually, I was having a good conversation with a friend, and I was really hot and bothered about something, and she made a comment that stopped me in my tracks. She said, I just want people to learn and be better because I just want them to grow because I love them. I just love, and in particular, she was saying Black people. I love Black people. And because I love Black people, I want other people to learn how to love Black people. And so I'm going to be patient and help people to learn, because that's what my goal is. I love. And it stopped me in my tracks because here I am, this devout church-going person who has a real hard time loving people. I'm all truth and no grace. I'm all like this is wrong and you're wrong, and not enough love and patience. And so I decided that this year what I was going to do was spend the year thinking about love. And you didn't know about this when you were nominating this book.
No, I didn't even know about it till you just said it.
But I feel like this has really helped me to see both things, to see the centrality of love in the sort of world that I'm imagining that's better than the thing we have. But it also gives me such great hope. There is so much hope in love, and that we really can be this exception. We really can build this exception together. And that's a really beautiful thing to sort of hope for. So that's sort of the thing that I'm staying with in the end.
Nice. And let's also end by being good bureaucrats. The views expressed here are our personal opinions and do not reflect the official or unofficial position of any government agency, policy, party, leader, or really anyone besides the two of us, and maybe you, but maybe not. This content has not been sponsored or approved by anyone and was mostly just made because we wanted an opportunity to talk about things that mattered to everyone, whether they realize it or not. Thank you all for listening.
Thanks for listening, everyone.